It's a little warm in here, so pardon me while I do this video in my wife beater. Over the 4th of July weekend, I read this book called The Liberal Hour, Washington and the Politics of Change in the 1960s. It's a pretty good book that seeks to explain the liberal legislation of the 1960s as the result of the work of politicians in Washington, D.C., not just as a consequence of larger social movements. And since I enjoyed the book, and I thought other people would too, I wanted to give one away, so I'm going to tell a little story and then do a quick trivia quiz. So most people know how for nearly a century the U.S. Senate was the graveyard for civil rights legislation. It was finally Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson, future president, who broke through some of the institutional obstacles in the Senate, and his changes allowed civil rights legislation to finally make it through the Senate. If you don't know this story, you should definitely pick up a copy of Robert Caro's Master of the Senate. In any case, not quite as well known as that story is the story of how civil rights legislation kept getting killed also in the House of Representatives. In the House, it was the chairman of the House Rules Committee, an entrenched, powerful, segregationist Southern Democrat from Virginia, who was able to kill civil rights legislation through parliamentary tricks throughout his whole tenure. Every bill coming out of the House of Representatives had to pass through the Rules Committee, so this guy could either instruct his subordinates to vote any civil rights legislation down, or if that weren't guaranteed enough for him, he could just refuse to hold a hearing on the bill and it would never get out of committee, effectively killing it. Shortly after President Kennedy was elected in 1960, he recognized that his legislative agenda would go nowhere with this guy in charge. So he sat down with his Vice President, Lyndon Johnson, and the Speaker of the House, a Democrat, and some other congressional leaders, and devised a plan to break this logjam of the House Rules Committee. Their simple plan was to expand the House Rules Committee by adding 3 new members, with 2 of these members being appointed by the Speaker of the House, in which case they would presumably be more sympathetic to liberal legislation and civil rights legislation. The Kennedy team came up with a further trick by saying that whatever expansion they agreed upon in this vote, it would only last for that Congress, 2 years. Anyway, this expansion proposal had to be voted on by the full Congress, so they took that battle to the House of Representatives, and the expansion passed by a narrow margin. Turns out the 2-year trick worked beautifully, because for the next Congress, they had to vote to continue the expansion of the House Rules Committee, and that time it passed overwhelmingly. And with this more liberal-leaning House Rules Committee, sure enough, civil rights legislation did get through the House with the big Civil Rights Act of 1964. So you've probably noticed that so far I've carefully omitted the name of this powerful chairman of the House Rules Committee, and I've omitted the name of the Speaker of the House, because that's the trivia question. Who was this powerful Democrat chairman of the House Rules Committee in the Congress that met from 1961 to 1963. He was actually, his tenure lasted much longer than that, but that's what we're talking about. And who was the Speaker of the House at the time? Find those 2 names, email them to me at david@theyoungturks.com, and write in your mailing address. I will pick a random winner among all the people who get the 2 names right and send them a copy of this book. And good luck to you, and I hope you win the book. Thanks.